Hey guys, Coach Caglione here. Today this is kind of part two of a two-part series. Last week we kind of talked about calling an audible. We spent a lot of time talking about if you're kind of run down, if you're sick, that sort of thing. And just to kind of recap with that, it really just kind of depends. We talked about how far are you out from a training, from a meet. So kind of where you are in the training cycle is going to really depend on how strict your adherence needs to be. That being said, again, if you're really sick, if you're really run down, it's probably best always just to take the day off, try to maybe make it up the next day or make up the workout later in the week. And again, sometimes that may not be possible when you're getting close to a competition, but at the end of the day, it's always probably better to feel fresh on game day. So these are kind of things to kind of keep in mind. That being said, the amount of training flexibility that you have when you're really close to the meet is going to be a lot lower. If you are in the off season, you have a lot more leeway with flexibility with your training, your frequency, missing a day. It's not going to really have as much of a cost to that as far as your performance on game day. So keep those things in mind when we're talking about this stuff. I also want to just kind of reiterate, I'm not a medical doctor, so when we start to talk about sickness and injuries and your overall health and well-being, realize that this is a lot of just from my experience and from what I've seen working with countless athletes over the past decade and more, and also training myself. So these are just some general advice, because sometimes it could be we all want to kind of continue to make progress. We want to train optimally. We don't want to rest too much if we don't need to. We don't want to train too hard and kind of set ourselves further backwards. So these are kind of some tips and tricks when you're kind of dealing with some stuff. So again, to recap with the sickness and kind of run down thing, it's always important to consider what you did before, what you did prior, and then what's to come. If you could kind of double down on your sleep, your recovery, maybe up your calories a little bit, that's always going to help kind of get you in a good recovery state of mind and allow you to kind of progress moving forward. So let's say it's not a sickness thing, it's not a tired thing, it's not like a stress management issue. Let's say you actually have some sort of kind of bump or bruise. Maybe you have like a little bit of a muscle tweak or some sort of joint pain. And again, when we're talking about this stuff, we're talking about mild stuff. We're not talking about tearing an ACL. We're not talking about a muscle tear where there's actually bruising in the muscle belly. We're talking about some more minor stuff, and depending on how severe it is, it's going to depend on how much you're going to modify things. I would always recommend try for smaller modifications first, and then you could try for bigger modifications. Bigger modifications if the pain is still there or gets worse. So just in general, if you're kind of having some issues like with some discomfort in a joint or a muscle belly with an unloaded exercise, and as you increase the load, if it doesn't get any worse, so that's probably a good sign that you can kind of proceed with caution. If the pain does get worse with load, then I would kind of stay at a load that's kind of manageable, that's not where it doesn't get worse. If pain kind of gets worse, so that'd be the first thing, would just be kind of lowering the intensity. So again, if you have 5 sets of 5 planned, maybe it's 70 to 75%, and maybe one of your joints or muscles kind of giving you some issues. Let's say you normally warm up with like 135, 225 through 315, that sort of thing. Take more sets in your warm-ups and less reps. Sometimes you might need to repeat the same weight multiple times until you feel good. If you start to feel better, then you can kind of proceed with the day. So that's a kind of general good rule of thumb, even if you're just maybe you don't have any kind of actual pain, but just things aren't feeling right, is actually just repeat the same weights again until it feels good. And if it's not feeling good, again, just stay at the lighter percentages and lighter weights. Maybe you take 5 or 10% off what you had planned for that day, or anywhere from let's say you're a 500-pound squatter, you take 25 or 50 pounds off the bar of what was prescribed, what was planned for that day. You get to go a little bit lighter, save, leave a little in the tank, and live to fight another day. So modifying intensity would be kind of the first thing. If that's still not good, you could also modify the volume. So again, if you have 5 sets of 5 planned, maybe you tried modifying intensity, that's still no good. Maybe you cut a set or 2 out, or maybe you cut a rep or 2 out. So you can modify the volume, and you can modify volume by eliminating sets or eliminating reps. Again, go for smaller changes first. So maybe you just take off a rep per set, but if you feel like that's not enough, then obviously you can start to eliminate sets from the program as well. So again, we can modify intensity, we can modify volume, and we can modify volume through the amount of sets and repetitions for that particular day. And if we're talking about modifying frequency, that would be over the course of a week. So maybe you take an exercise out, that'd be the full exercise, so that'd be a more major change. So the intensity would be probably the first thing I would look at, then look at the volume, and then look at the frequency last, because frequency is going to be more dependent over the course of a work week or a work day. So maybe if you're doing 1 to 2, maybe you have 2 squat variants planned, maybe you have your competition squat and a pause squat, maybe you eliminate pause squats completely, and that would kind of adjust your frequency some. Okay. So that's some pretty standard advice, but I think it's worth kind of mentioning, because sometimes sometimes you need to call an audible. Sometimes you see, let's say you're feeling really good, maybe you increase the amount of sets you're doing, or maybe you increase the amount of reps you're doing by a little bit. Again, I would advise just to make small changes at first. Same thing, so maybe you bump the weight up a little bit, maybe you bump the reps up a tiny bit, maybe you bump up the amount of sets you're doing a tiny bit. But again, I would not make too many drastic changes. I heard this analogy the other day. If you're kind of like steering a boat, if you start to make a turn, you start to make an adjustment. It's slow moving. You can't just like do a 360 and turn around. So make small adjustments over time, whether those adjustments be positive or negative for the course of the day. Because what you do today is also going to affect what you do tomorrow. So it's important whether you ramp up or ramp down, whether you're up regulating or down regulating. It's just realize that it's going to have an effect on your subsequent training days moving forward and the subsequent phase and training cycles to come. So every decision that you make today is going to have an impact not only for the day itself, but for future workouts. So we talked about so that's a given if if you plan on just keeping the same actual exercise selection. It's just toying with the variables. Other things that you could do, if it's more of like a nervous system standpoint, you can kind of adjust the tempo, maybe add some pauses. It's just slowing things down so you can adjust the speed of the movement. Slowing things down when you're feeling a little run down or a little beat up is usually a good idea. And then as you get a little bit progress into the warm-up, you warm up a little bit better, then you can start to pick up the tempo a little bit if you start to feel better. If you're not feeling as better, I would keep the tempo a little bit slow. So slow eccentric work and pauses. We'll just by slowing down the movement, adding some isometrics, adding some long eccentrics, that's just going to ensure you're using proper technique. And if you're in a better groove, you have a better chance to have a better pattern. It's going to be more joint friendly, less stress in your body, and making sure the stress is on the right places. If you're rushing through your warm-ups and you're kind of a little bit all over the place because you're run down or sore, maybe you're kind of compensating a little bit. So if you're kind of breaking your pattern, that could be detrimental, especially if you're kind of trying to work around an injury, or like I said, whether it be some joint pain or some muscle belly tightness, or just some like tissue quality issues. So those are some considerations. And again, there's a big difference between being injured and hurt. So if you're able to do the movements and there's a little discomfort, that's a big difference between the movements being painful. When you start really dealing with like actual true pain and it's really kind of, really messing you up, please refer out. You can check out resources like clinicalathlete.com. Again, we're not a doctor, but clinicalathlete.com will find a provider in your area. If you are in the Long Island area, I would check out Dr. Alberry. It's Dr. Alberry, D-R, no period, D-R-A-L-B-E-R-R-Y at yahoo.com, Dr. Alberry at yahoo.com. Let them know that Gaglione Strength sent you. He'll take care of you if you're in the Long Island area. So when you're really dealing with true pain and it's not just discomfort, definitely refer out. So that's number one. So I want to just use that as disclaimers. Let's say you elected to decide to proceed with your session. Maybe you modified the volume, the intensity, and the frequency already. You kind of toyed with those. Now it's time to start to toy with exercise selection. So again, start with small changes and then work your way down. So all these different movement patterns, there's going to be horizontal and vertical progressions. So for an example would be of like a horizontal like kind of progression or regression. A safety squat bar and a straight bar squat, in my opinion, would be not necessarily in the same category as far as competition lift, but as far as strength training goes, a safety squat bar and a straight bar squat would be kind of on a level playing field, in my opinion. They're both barbell squats. They're both going to be a little bit higher stressful on the body. They're both compressively loaded. So those are kind of on the same playing field. So even though that the competition squat, the straight bar squat is going to have higher dynamic correspondence, the total systemic stress in the body is going to be relatively similar. Whereas something like a goblet squat would be more of a vertical regression, because now it's not a barbell anymore. There's going to be a lot less compressive load. There's going to be a lot less absolute load as well. So that's going to kind of fall down. A front squat or high bar squat as well can, unless high bar squat is your stronger variant, that would also kind of fall further down the list because you're going to be using less load. But it's very similar. So depending on, these are some different, definitely a front squat would be a step down because the load is definitely going to be less. High bar squat might be a horizontal kind of variation, depending on how strong you are, high bar versus low bar. So I want to kind of, we'll start with squats first. So if you have some sort of kind of, we'll start with the top down. If you're dealing with some sort of wrist, elbow, or shoulder discomfort, a safety squat bar is going to be a great option for you because you could literally do the exercise with your hands free. So I would start off if widening your grip out or going from low bar to high bar, so going from low bar to high bar. Going from low bar to high bar would be the smallest adjustment you can make. You could also work on widening your grip out for that particular day. You could also start out with a wider grip and then work your way in. If all those things don't work for you, then I would switch from a barbell squat to a safety squat bar squat. So for any upper body issue that you're dealing with, wrist, elbow, shoulder, that would be the smallest kind of exercise variation that you can make. If you're still having issues at that point for whatever reason, you could also go further down the list and then go into a belt squat. Then you could also go into, if that's still for whatever reason not good for whatever reason, you can go into a leg press or just doing single leg work or just assistance work. So that'd be kind of further down the list, regressing in a vertical fashion. If you're dealing with some sort of lower back kind of issue, you want to think about which exercises are going to not load the spine as much. So exercises that are going to allow for a more vertical back are going to be good choices for this. Now, some people can squat with a safety bar with a more vertical back, but in general, the safety bar is going to push you forward. So my first switch would be go from low bar to high bar because you have a more upright posture. If that is still not good, you could try high bar squat with heels elevated to allow your knees to travel forward more, have a little bit more of a vertical back angle. At that point, you could still, if that's still not good, you can go from a high bar squat to a front squat. If you have some wrist or elbow considerations and a front squat's not good for you, at that point you can go to a belt squat as well. If that's still no good for you, then you can go to a goblet squat or a leg press or something like that, or just do your accessory work. So that'd be for some lower back, any type of trunk or midsection kind of discomfort. So that would be a good progression for that as well. Okay. Now, kind of moving down the chain, if you have some maybe some hip issues, the first thing I would look at is your squat stance. So maybe you go from a wide stance low bar squat to a more narrow stance high bar squat, a narrow stance front squat, a narrow stance belt squat, goblet squat, leg press, etc. You can also try box squatting and cutting down the range of motion at certain heights. So maybe a full range of motion squat is not in the cards for you, but a slightly above parallel or a parallel box squat or an inch or two above parallel squat is in the cards, so you could try that as well. I would also consider squatting with the hip circle to make sure your hip muscles are activating properly and firing optimally. That way your kind of hip joint is tracking in the socket better. So that's a consideration that I would consider for the squat as well. If you're dealing with some knee pain, same thing. You could just squat with a little bit more of a vertical shin. So at this point, it would actually be the opposite. So if you had front squats or high bar squats planned, a low bar squat is going to have a more vertical shin angle and a more horizontal back. So squatting with a more bent over style can be beneficial if you're dealing with some knee pain. If you're already squatting low bar and still getting knee pain, or knee discomfort I should say, then box squatting again is going to allow you to lean forward even more, sit back even more, and have a more vertical or even a negative shin angle. You could squat to a high box and go a little bit wider stance and a little bit more bent over. Again, if that's still no good, you could try the same thing. You could box squat with a belt squat. You could do a wide stance leg press with a more vertical shin, and those would be some substitutions as well. And then this would not really be the best going even further down the line. You could also switch squats for something like a good morning, so you're still working your back and posterior chain and just kind of taking your knees out of the equation. But the barbell's still on your back, so it's going to still have a good transfer to your squat and kind of build up your glutes, hamstrings, and low back for squatting. Ankles, feet kind of considerations. We actually had a girl who was a lifeguard, and she kind of ended up breaking her foot. So for a while she was walking her squats out. She was able to, once she was kind of cleared to go, she started using the monolift. So if you're doing a walked out squat versus a monolift squat's going to be safer and easier on the feet and ankles because you don't have to kind of deal with stabilizing the weight by walking it out. So that's a consideration that you can kind of work on as well. If you did have a major kind of foot injury or whatever, then I would just kind of work on doing assistance work where you're not grounded. So things like back extensions and things like that, and machine work, leg curls, and leg extensions and things like that, where your foot is not in contact with the ground, and you can still get a lot of great lower body work as well. So I want to go into the deadlift next. So same thing with the deadlift, with the squat. We'll start kind of from like the top down. If you're dealing with some sort of upper body injury, like maybe you have a torn bicep, or you're having some bicep tendonitis, maybe you have a wrist, elbow, or shoulder issue. Let's say that deadlifting is not in the cards, but let's say you were kind of dealing with some issues maybe with your supinated hand. Pulling in straps might be an option. Pulling from less range of motion might be an option. If for some reason those things, or maybe you're dealing with a hand injury, you could also potentially use straps. At that point, if for some reason you had a really limited function of your upper body, like I mentioned before, good mornings would be a good option. Specifically with like a safety squat bar where you could potentially do without your hands or just lightly touching the handles. The only modification I would make to make it a little bit more specific to the deadlift is do a chain suspended or a strap suspended good mornings. That way you're starting from a dead stop, so you can kind of mimic the position of your conventional or sumo deadlift from the floor, and you can kind of do like a bottoms up good morning or a bottom up squat. So you can do an Anderson squat from pins or straps, or an Anderson good morning. That would be a really good substitution for the deadlift if you're dealing with some sort of upper body issue where you can't grab the bar, or you're having some issues in the wrist, elbow, or shoulder joint. If you're dealing with some lower back tightness or some lower back discomfort, the first thing I would recommend is reducing the height. So if you're doing maybe deadlifts from the floor or bothering your back, you could switch from a conventional to a sumo deadlift, because you're going to have a more vertical upright torso. There's going to be a smaller moment arm between yourself and your lower back, so it's a smaller moment arm between the barbell and your hip, and consequently your spine. At that point, you could also do a block pull. I would start off again with a smaller change, so start off with just maybe an inch block pull. If that's still giving you some discomfort, you can go to like 1 inch, 2 inch, 3 inches, etc. Find a range of motion. The higher you go up, the less the moment arm is going to be, and that would be kind of a good substitution to still get some glute and hamstring work, some lower back work, but still not affect your lower back as much. You could also consider doing just assistance work again. So you could do like a belt squat kind of good morning, so we're a belt hinge, if you will, hip hinge. You could do glute bridges, you could do back extensions. Glute bridges would be really far down the list, but again, back extension is still like a bigger moment arm there, so at that point you can kind of, if back extensions are still no good, you can go all the way down to assistance work for the glute bridge. So again, start off with the deadlift. If you need to make like a horizontal move, good morning would be kind of in that same category. If you needed to make more of a vertical move, you can reduce the range of motion and switch into like a sumo deadlift or block pull. And if that's no good, you can go vertically down the list and then start to do 45-degree back extensions. And then if that's still no good, then you can do glute bridges in place of deadlifts for that particular day. If your knees are bothering you, let's go with the hips next. If the hips are bothering you in a sumo deadlift, then I would go to a conventional deadlift. You can also play with the range of motion, so maybe full range from the floor, or like a deficit is no good for you, but you could do a block pull. Is going to, again, stretch the hips a little bit less, so try adjusting the range of motion, or try adjusting your stance. So again, going from sumo to conventional could be a good option there, or going from a regular stance from the floor to like a block pull, again, could be beneficial. If your hip is still bothering you at that point, you could try something like a squat buddy or something like that. But for the most part, in reducing the range of motion and then going into a conventional stance is probably going to solve most of your any kind of hip kind of discomfort in the deadlift. For knees are going to be like a similar thing. Usually you'll get a little bit more knee pain in the sumo deadlift because if the knees are collapsing or something like that. It doesn't happen often, so again, you can reduce the range of motion, or you can go from sumo to conventional for that particular day. If you want to kind of take the knees completely out of the equation, you could also do like a semi-stiff-legged deadlift where the knees are really bending minimally, or a Romanian deadlift, or again, a higher block pull. That's going to really kind of limit the amount of knee requirement for that particular day. And again, if you had to kind of regress or switch up the variation, make a horizontal shift to something like a good morning or a suspended good morning or like a higher block pull, that would totally be fine. And again, you could again go down the line, but in general, more straight leg versions like straight leg bridges, back extensions, straight leg glute bridges would kind of all probably help kind of work around the knee if you couldn't bend your knee for whatever reason. Ankles typically aren't a concern, and feet for the deadlift, but if for some reason it is, again, something like a back extension would be a good option where your feet aren't really grounded, and again, machine work would be great as well. So kind of use exercises that you don't really need to use your feet or ankles. Something like leg curls come to mind, something like back extensions come to mind. So those would be considerations for the ankles and the feet. All right, so moving on to bench press. So if you have any upper kind of body issues for the bench press, we probably have videos on this. Maybe we could shoot some others if you guys, using things like ab straps. So if you have any kind of wrist or elbow, like really major issues in your wrist and elbow, using like ab straps that you can kind of put on your bicep and attaching bands to it where you can do pec flies. Obviously a pec deck machine where you're kind of having your elbow and like your wrist is not involved. So any type of hands-free upper body exercises. But again, by putting like ab straps on your upper body, I could do flies, I can kind of do tricep type motions, I could do kind of pressing type motions, and I can still get some work for the upper body. That'd be a very extreme example that we would try not to go for that for our first option, but like we've had some issue, wrestlers like kind of in the past have kind of broken their hands and stuff, and they can still get some great upper body work by attaching ab straps to their bicep, and they can do some kind of pressing and fly motions as well as rear delt type motions. So if I have bands this way, I can kind of do a little bit of a rowing motion or reverse fly. So if you have any kind of major kind of issues in your upper body, those are some great options. So any type of hands-free, kind of putting ab straps on your biceps and attaching bands or a cable to it's going to be a great option for you. If you have any wrist issues, I would just make sure maybe wrap your wrist a little bit earlier on the bench press. That's going to be a big one. Making sure your wrist is secure. Wearing some elbow sleeves on the bench press is good, or a slingshot can help as well. If you're having some shoulder issues, a slingshot could be a good variation as well. So this is kind of an interesting point. If you have some sort of bicep issues going on, actually widen your grip a little bit, because a lot of people say like use a closer grip to kind of help your shoulders, but if you give your bicep a little bit more room to breathe, actually going a little bit wider we find can be beneficial if you're kind of dealing with that. If you're dealing with elbow issues, same kind of thing. A lot of times a close grip bench is going to put more torque on the elbow. So again, going a little bit wider grip and having a more medium or wide grip is going to be helpful there. If you're dealing with some shoulder issues, potentially bringing your grip in a little bit can help, but if you don't have a lot of internal rotation, going in too close could be problematic as well. So just finding a grip that's comfortable for your shoulder is going to be really important. We talked about it before, but besides adjusting the grip width, besides putting on a slingshot, let's say you don't want to go full range of motion, you can start with like a one board or a floor press. It's going to limit the range of motion, so you don't need as much shoulder extension. One board, two board, three board. Find a board height that's comfortable for you if you're dealing with some pec or shoulder issues. That's kind of like the basics for the upper body. And again, try your barbell variations first. And then if you had to go down the list, you can kind of do the band or machine kind of versions of like flies and extensions and things like that. Bands are going to be the least stressful. Machines would be a little bit more stressful. Dumbbells a little bit more stressful, and the barbell is typically the most stressful. But you can also use the most weight. So try to do the barbell variations first. Try adjusting your grip. Try adjusting the variation. So again, going from like, again, if you have some shoulder issues, limiting the range of motion using a slingshot, so you're doing a board press or a floor press is going to be good ideas for that as well. When you're dealing with bicep or elbow issues, adjusting the grip is going to be important. Like I mentioned before, finding a grip that's comfortable for you. And then again, if that's not good, then you can adjust to different board heights where we're just getting a little bit of a range of motion there. So that's kind of some considerations for the upper body when benching. If you're dealing with some lower back or trunk issues, this is a really simple fix. It's just benching with your feet up or doing a floor press, so just not actually arching when you bench, so taking your feet up off the floor. And this would be the same thing for knee pain, ankle pain, etc. You could bench with your feet completely straight, you could bench with your feet bent, but just taking your legs out of the equation is going to help any lower back, hips, knees, ankles. So going from a regular bench to a feet up bench is going to be the simplest consideration for that. I do think some people talk about the football bar and stuff being easier on the shoulders with the parallel grip. That's one thing I'm not really completely sold on. I know a lot of people talk about it. I think boards and floor presses, things like that, are going to be better. I know sometimes like a close parallel grip can kind of have you jammed up either. I think this is going to be easier to kind of maintain your retraction if you're in a pronated grip. So you could try a football bar, you could try palms and dumbbell benching, but in my opinion, I think some of the other options mentioned are going to be a little bit better. So I think that's basically it for kind of benching. So you just want to think about whether it's squat, bench, or deadlift, think about the joint that's having discomfort or the muscle that's having discomfort and try to work around it. Try to make horizontal progressions first, and then if you need to make a vertical progression, if you need to regress the exercise, that's fine. So look at the exercise variation. Try to make the smallest adjustment possible first. So the smallest adjustments possible in general would be keeping the same exercise, but modifying the stance or grip width, or modifying the range of motion of the exercise. So that would be my first plan of attack. If any of those really don't work, then you can kind of modify the actual exercise itself. Try to have a horizontal progression where it's kind of a similar stimulus. If you need to kind of go down the line, you could change up the barbell, you could change up the exercise a little bit, and if those are still no good, you can regress the exercise to something like a body weight, dumbbell band resistance, or machine work to kind of work around those joints. So that's kind of calling an audible, but the name of the game is consistency over a long period of time. So if you can do something is always better than nothing. And in the event where you can't work the joint at all, like there was a time where I dislocated the shoulder and I partially tore all my rotator cuff muscles and my labrum. I just worked my good arm. So working one arm is better than working zero arms. Working one leg is better than working zero legs. Working your upper body is better than not working your whole body at all. Working your lower body is better than not working out your whole body at all. So do what you can, focus on what you can do, not what you can't. That's part of what calling it audible is all about. Listen to your body, don't train into pain. Again, check out clinicalathlete.com or check out Dr. Alberry at yahoo.com if you're in the Long Island area. That's going to be really crucial. So I think that about wraps it up for a Calling It Audible series. I hope that was pretty comprehensive for you. If you have questions, if you want to shoot comments, or you could contact us if you want any specific, maybe we could do little breakout videos on some certain exercises, but I think this was pretty comprehensive. I hope this helps you. This is definitely probably a video we'll refer to for definitely our distance clients and distance members in the future, because I do think it's helpful, and I think sometimes, when you're trying to make these decisions on the fly, it can be hard to figure them out. So hopefully this helped you. Again, focus on what you can do, not what you can't. Listen to your body. Don't train into pain. Thank you guys so much for watching. If someone's maybe dealing with some discomfort in the joint, maybe share this podcast with them. If the podcast helped you, please give it a 5-star review. It helps other people find us. Thank you for watching. Check out the links below. Until next time, stay strong, and I'll see you soon.